חודש מאי עומד להסתיים, חודש יוני עומד להתחיל, ועבור אוהדי ה-NBA יוני אומר שני דברים: סדרת הגמר ותחילת הטירוף של העונה הבאה. דראפט, שמועות והמון טריידים, מעט אמיתיים וגם הרבה מדומיינים. הפרק הקרוב של עושים NBA יחבר בין שני האירועים האלה עם אורחת ואורח מיוחדים. נשמע מהם האם ג'ו מזולה באמת השתנה מאז הפלייאוף שעבר, כמה פעמים ג'ייסון טייטום יכול לענות על אותה שאלה, איך היה לראות את השם הכי חם בכדורסל הנשים האמריקאים בהופעת הבכורה שלה ב-WNBA, וגם האם אדם סילבר החליט שחלאס עם שושלות, האם דנבר היא הקורבן הראשון של חוקי השכר החדשים, ואפילו נענה על הסוגיה שהצפנו בפרק הקודם, למה לעזאזל לברון ג'יימס לא מוותר על כמה גרושים. פרק 182 של עושים NBA, פרק בונוס, יוצאים לדרך.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to עושים NBA. Here are your starting five.
האם הטיול של בוסטון לסדרת הגמר הוא חדשות רעות עבורה, והאם זה באמת היה כזה טיול? למה אנשים נהנים כל כך לבקר את ג'ייסון טייטום? איך נראתה מקרוב הופעת הבכורה של קייטלין קלארק? איך ג'יילן ברונסון יכול לתת כתף למאמצי ההתחזקות של הניקס? והאם ה-NBA הפכה בעצם לליגה תחרותית מדי? אז ערן סורוקה איתכם לפרק 182, תשתדלו לא למצמץ במהלכו, ואת הפרק הקרוב נחלק בין האורחת והאורח שלנו. נועה דלזלי, עיתונאית אמריקאית ילידת תל אביב שמסקרת מקרוב את בוסטון סלטיקס, ויוסי גוזלן הוא עיתונאי אמריקאי, שורשים ישראלים בעצמו, והוא מהאנשים שבאמת קראו את כל הסכם העבודה החדש בין הנהלת ה-NBA לשחקנים, מכיר כל סעיף, ולא רק יכול לדבר על זה שעות, הוא אפילו פתח ערוץ יוטיוב בדיוק בשביל זה. בואו נתחיל.
רבע ראשון.
Our first guest today has a family name that sounds familiar for Israeli basketball fans, especially from around the age of 40 or more. John, her father, was one of the best shooters in Israeli basketball when he started here. However, Noa Dalzeli is not only a gifted basketball player herself, she is a journalist covering the Eastern Conference incoming champs, the Boston Celtics, for SB Nation's Celtics blog. How are you, Noa?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We'll get to the special backgrounds a bit later, but let's start with the Celtics that you're covering right now, even in the practice facility. So first of all, we're recording this as the Mavs are up 3-1 on the Wolves. How do you like the Celtics' chances in the finals?
I like them a lot. I think, honestly, the only team that I was really worried about in the finals, and obviously anything can happen, but was with the Denver Nuggets. And so once they were eliminated, I think my confidence in this team's ability to pull off a championship definitely increased. Dallas, I think, is probably a better matchup for the Celtics, but they also have two players that can kind of single-handedly win a game, whereas I don't know that Minnesota does at this point. So I'm kind of assuming that Dallas is going to win just because no team has ever come back from being down 3-0. So in my head, that's kind of the matchup that I've been thinking about. But I think either way, the Celtics will be the favorite going into that series.
Do you think that the easy path they had without facing any real adversity, any real challenge so far will make it harder for them to turn up the intensity when needed?
No, I don't think so. I think the whole idea of this easy path is a little bit overblown. Like, obviously they face teams that have been missing star players, but I don't think the Pacers without Tyrese Halliburton were any worse than the Pacers with him, for example. And so on paper, if you have him playing those games and he's the one that's going off for 30, not Aaron and Nembhard, for example, then maybe people are sitting there being like, okay, this is a star that's playing well against the Celtics. And once it becomes a role player that's doing that, I think people start to delegitimize that effort. But NBA role players are very talented, and sometimes all they need is an opportunity, and they're just as competitive or just as skilled as some of the stars. And I also think that this is a group that has been together for a couple of years, the core of the Celtics team, and they have been through so many battles that it doesn't matter that, Game 7 against Miami, against the 76ers last year. I mean, they've played in so many Game 7s. They've played against all the most elite players in the world. Like, this has been years in the making, that even in the last month, if they haven't faced any like superstars, I don't think that really impacts their ability to turn things up. And the Pacers had one of the best offenses in NBA history, which I think sometimes people overlook. So I don't really subscribe to this idea that they've been kind of coasting and now it's all of a sudden going to be a challenge, because they've been the most dominant team in the NBA all season.
You mentioned the being in Game 7, and Joe Mazzulla, obviously, last year is leading Game 7 as a rookie coach. Do you think that he really changed from last year, having more experienced team, one more year under his belt?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a question that he gets all the time. We always joke that sometimes whenever there's like a news anchor or someone that's not regularly covering the team, it's the first question that's asked. So he's answered it like 30 times. How have you changed from last year? And he always says the same thing. He says, time. Like, I had another year under my belt and I had an off season to prepare. I think people forget that he didn't have an off season to prepare last year, that it was literally days before training camp that he became appointed the head coach. And so he wasn't able to kind of put together his own coaching philosophies. He wasn't able to assemble his own coaching staff. It was such a unique situation. And even so, they came a game away from making the NBA Finals. And so I think he got a lot of scrutiny for last year. And he came back this year with the ability to actually like assemble his own staff, put together his own philosophies in order. And he's obviously feeling way more comfortable and confident. And this team has another year with him as well. So there's more trust and buy-in. But yeah, I think it's like anybody else. Nobody's like amazing at their job when they first start. But then when you have a little bit of experience under your belt, you're obviously going to be more comfortable.
Yeah, let's go to another one that faces a lot of scrutiny. Jayson Tatum. We see a lot of players acting as alpha male, like Luka and Joker, of course. Do you think that Jayson Tatum can become the alpha male on the mold of Luka and the Joker? Even Anthony Edwards, like right now, it did look like it several times in the last couple of years, but he never did it consistently over a whole series or playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question, like, what do you like? I guess it depends on like what is an alpha male, right? And like, what does that actually mean for being a good basketball player? Like, I think people just want him to yell and like be loud at the podium, and that's just not his personality. Like, he's just a quiet person. And so, like, if you're asking, can he pass Anthony Edwards? Like, I think he already has. I think he's a better basketball player than Anthony Edwards, and he has been for the last few years. And Anthony Edwards just has a kind of big flamboyant personality, and he is very charismatic, and he says whatever he wants to say, and he doesn't speak under like media PR training or whatever. But if you actually look at Tatum's on-court production, like, he's been really good in this playoffs. Like, besides for the fact that he's struggled from shooting threes, which is, that happens. He led the Celtics in all categories: points, assists, rebounds, heading into the finals. And he has just like, for his, I think he's the third leading scorer for playoff points ever at his age. And so I don't know. I think people just want him to have a different personality than he has. And that's sometimes where it's coming from. Because if you actually look at like the success that he's having on the court, he's been really effective in the first 7 years of his career. And I think guys like Luka and Anthony Edwards, they have just a personality that fits better as far as like the entertainment side of the NBA, which is obviously a big side of it as well.
Yeah, you just mentioned being at the podium, and a couple of weeks ago we had like this whole "we're not super team" rallying cry. He like complained about not having a lot of end of season awards, which in my opinion, they got the most important one for Brad Stevens, who assembled this group of teams. So what do you think about the not super team when they clearly have the best 6 top players in the NBA?
Yeah, so he got a lot of scrutiny for that speech, that answer that he gave. And I always think it's never worth like overly analyzing someone's comments, just because someone like him, like, he pretty much never misspeaks. I can tell you, as someone who sat through every one of his press conferences, he gets asked the same questions over and over again. Like, the amount of times that he's been asked, why aren't you shooting well? And it's like, if someone asked me, why aren't you shooting well, for the 30th time, I would be like, I'm not talking to you. Like, I'm not giving you an answer here. But he always responds with patience and like compassion and things. And so I think for that one, he probably wishes he could take that back, because bringing up awards after a playoff loss, like, it was just inviting scrutiny. That being said, like, I do think he has a point, in the sense that they had one All-NBA player, and that was him, right? I think Jaylen Brown should have been named All-NBA. Whether that matters that much, ultimately Jaylen Brown was named All-NBA last year, the year that it really mattered for his contract. And he just got an award, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, that I think will mean more to him than All-NBA ever could have. But I do think he has a point that there was one All-NBA player. Meanwhile, teams like the Lakers and the Phoenix Sun, they both had two, and those teams didn't even advance in the playoffs, right? And so I you know, it came a little bit of frustration of like, why do the Celtics have to be perfect? You know, it's not like they have 5 all-stars that are starting. And I will say, like, you know, in an ideal world, they're not paying attention to the media narratives, and they're not watching ESPN, and they're not on Twitter, but they are. And if you go online, like, this Celtics team, I feel like no matter how well they play or how good their record is, it's still not good enough. Like, they're 12-2 in this playoff run. Like, that's as good as it gets, really. But people are like, they shouldn't have lost those 2 games because they were playing down to their opponents. Whereas it's like, nobody ever wins 14 games in a row. Like, that doesn't happen in the regular season when you're playing lottery teams for 10 games straight, right? So I think where that came from was just this feeling for him of like, we've been playing really well, and like, we're still constantly under fire, as though we have like a team of all-stars, but we actually just have a normal team that has 2 all-stars, 1 All-NBA player. Like, there's a lot of teams that fall under that category. They don't have coach of the year. I obviously think that they do have the best 6 players in the NBA, and there was some reward of that, like the executive of the year, Drew Holiday and Derek White both being named all defense. I thought that was great that they got that recognition. But I can understand how in that moment he's kind of thinking like, what is the standard for us? Like, you know, until they win a championship, the reality is that they're still going to be scrutinized. And honestly, the way that I've been seeing the national media narrative, I wouldn't be surprised if they win and their championship is invalidated because they had an easier path in most years, you know? So you just have to kind of ignore the narrative sometimes too.
I just said that if you just take out the championship that included rivals players getting hurt, you have to disqualify 1/3 of the championship in the NBA history, basically, at least. But they do have Porzingis, who was an all-star, and Holiday, who was an all-star, is supposed to be an Olympic team member, right. and Al Horford was an all-star even one time. So who is the leader, the on-court leader, the emotional leader of this team, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's been a big topic of discussion. I would say that there's probably a couple of leaders, and everybody leads in their own way. But Jaylen Brown has kind of asserted himself as the vocal leader. Like, we know after a loss, he's going to be the one that goes to the podium and says, like, I know how disappointed he is, or he'll call the team out for a lack of effort. Like, that's his leadership style. I think in some ways, Al Horford is the leader because Al is kind of the respected veteran that's everybody wants to win for him, right? So there's that feeling as well. I think Tatum has a kind of like quiet leadership more by example. And I think people want him to be a more vocal leader, but it's just probably not his personality. So those 3 guys are probably your top leaders. I think there's a certain quality that Drew Holiday brings as well, as the only person on the roster that's won a championship. I don't think he brings it up very often, but I think there's an understanding that kind of like he sets the tone in a lot of ways, especially defensively. So, you know, it really is like, I think the whole starting lineup has their own leadership qualities, but then there's also people you might not expect. Like, every time I talk to one of the players on the bench that doesn't play often, and I ask them like, who's really been mentoring you, who's taken you under their wing, they all say Peyton Pritchard. So that's not someone you might expect, because he's not a guy that's playing 30 minutes a night, but he has a certain leadership role as well on this team, because he knows what it's like to be a guy that's not playing for an entire playoff run. And so he's been able to be a leader to those guys in some sense. So I think it's a team effort. It's not a team like some of the teams might be, where there's one guy that kind of runs the show. But if you look at like the Denver Nuggets last year, I don't think Jokic was the leader of that team. He said often, like, I don't give speeches in the locker room. I don't call people out. Like, that's what KCP does. That's what, you know,
Jeff did.
Yeah, right. Like, some of the older players that weren't even playing were those leaders. And so I think with Tatum, there's a little bit of an obsession of like wanting him to be the vocal leader, but it's actually not that unusual that the star player is not the one that's like calling people out. I think maybe historically it was more conventional that way.
Yeah, somebody we didn't you didn't mention as a leader, but he actually didn't tend to lead because he didn't play most of the playoffs. Is Kristaps Porzingis, and he just unlocked so much of the potential of the Celtics. And is he going to be available for the finals? We assume he will. Let's talk about his role as the enabler of this whole Celtics explosion.
Yeah, I mean, right before he went down in Miami, both Jaylen and Jayson said he was the most important player on their team because of what they were trying to accomplish. And I remember I posted a video of them saying that, and a lot of people in the comments were like, they're jinxing him, now he's going to get hurt. And then obviously he got hurt. And so I think he brings them a dynamic that they were really missing last year. A kind of a safety valve, like when the offense gets stagnant, when the zone defense is kind of breaking them down or throwing too many bodies at Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, he's kind of a release valve. And the reality is that I think they've figured out how to survive without him, and that just is a testament to their growth as players and as a team. But I think they're better if he's available, right? So I've maintained, even if he doesn't come back, I think they'll still be able to win without him. But if he does come back and he's able to contribute at any sort of level, it's just only going to elevate what they're capable of. And a little bit of that is offensively, but honestly, more of that to me is defensively. And that's the part that I think sometimes people have overlooked around what his impact is. He was one of the best rim protectors in the league this year. And the Celtics pick and roll defense this playoffs has been one of the worst in the league. I think that's been a point where they've struggled a little bit. And part of it is just like a concession that they're willing to make. They're willing to live with that. But with him, he's just longer. He has like several more inches on Al Horford. And so he's on the perimeter, even if he can't move as quick as some other players, like he has the ability to impact those shots more than Al does, just because of his wingspan and his height. And so from where I think they'll really benefit from having him back.
רבע שני.
All right. Let's take a breath and talk a bit about Noah, about you. You said you were born in Israel. Can you share some memories that you have from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Israel. I moved to America when I was 6. And most of my memories are honestly less from those first 6 years, but they're more from spending a lot of summers there. Because we would, up until I got to college, I would spend almost every summer, at least 3 weeks or a month or something like that in Israel. And so honestly, most of my memories are just with my family, like my cousins and my family that still lives there. I have, aunts, uncles, my grandma's still in Israel. And so I just remember like we would have sleepovers or we would cook or make food late at night. Like just that's, when I think about my childhood and my extended family, like it was all in Tel Aviv where I was born. And so I think as far as just place, like, I don't know if you know Oppenheimer, like that area, that's where my family lived. That's where my grandma lives still. And so that whole area, we would always kind of run around and talk to people. And I think sometimes something that people don't realize, because I know there's a lot of safety concerns in Israel as well. And obviously they're very different, but there's also like a feeling of like kids can just go downstairs and like go to the park by themselves. That is not the same in the US. Like in the US, you wouldn't just have your kids go to the park. Like just because I think there's a bigger fear of like strangers and kidnapping, even though it's not that legitimate. But in Israel, I think there's at least back when I was a kid, I don't know how it is now, but I remember when we moved to America, I would be like, oh, can I just go to the park? My mom would be like, oh no, like we're in America now. Like you can't do that. So I have this feeling of like freedom almost that was associated with those years. And honestly, I don't know how like statistically true it is that it's safer for a little kid to go downstairs to the park in Oppenheimer than it is in Brookline where I live. But from at least from a mentality standpoint, that's the way that my family operated. So that's kind of my biggest memory, is being able to just like go downstairs and just go outside.
And how was it to grow up in a family that breathes basketball, basically?
Yeah, I always say that like my family was not very religious, but I always say like basketball was our religion in a sense. And I feel bad for my mom when I say that, because it wasn't her religion really. But she's been around basketball ever since she met my dad. But to me, it was just like a thing that united me, my dad, my brother. We're the 3 that are really like obsessed with basketball. Like I still call my dad every single day after a Celtics game and debrief like everything that we saw in the game. And I think it actually made it, when I started this career, like it made it a lot easier, because I was so used to talking about basketball. It wasn't for anything, but it was just on the phone with my dad. And so like, it was always one of the most important things in my life growing up, and mostly as a player. But it's cool to be able to kind of like keep talking about it and keep having it be a big part of my life, even when I'm not playing as much.
The big 3 of the Dazzle family. And when did you decide that you want to be a journalist?
Yeah, honestly, like I wanted to be a journalist as a kid, and I did a lot of journalism in high school. My high school was kind of known for its journalism program. It was almost like a college level journalism program. We had like 60 students on the newspaper. We had a bunch of faculty. I was spending like most of my free time working on the newspaper. And then I ran our sports paper, and I remember we won an award. And as the editor, I went to go to this dinner to accept this award. And at this dinner, I was talking to actually someone I know now who still works in this space, who's covering the Celtics. And he was kind of like the guest of honor at the dinner. And I asked him about his journey to become a Celtics reporter. And he walked me through like how rigorous it was, years of writing obituaries and covering like local crime and so many different things that sounded pretty like difficult to get to that point. And I remember I left that dinner and I said, okay, I'm not going to become a journalist because this sounds way too complicated. And like, I just want to cover the Celtics. I don't want to go cover like obituaries for 5 years so I can like earn the right to cover the Celtics. And so that's kind of how, that's when I decided I didn't want to be a journalist. So I went to college to work in politics. And I'm also a climate lobbyist. So that's what I do when I'm not doing the Celtics. But then about a year ago, I started thinking like I really do miss it, and I applied for a writing position kind of on a whim. It wasn't what I studied in college, but I did have that background of like really formal training in high school, which sounds like kind of ridiculous to say that my high school training is what prepared me, but it really did. It was like super high level, teaching. And then, yeah, I kind of went back to it. And now I realized that like I did skip a bunch of steps because I never covered anything outside. Like I went right to covering the Celtics, which is what I always wanted. But I think it also reflects that the landscape is different now, where it's not as traditional, where you go through and write for a local paper for 4 years. And then like anybody can just start blogging or their own podcast or things. Like I think it's democratized it a little bit.
Yeah, I was a journalist from the age of 15, so I can definitely relate to this one. You're also covering the Connecticut Sun for the next hoops and swish appeal. And you've been in something that you can already tell your unborn kids and grandkids. You were in the media circus that was as known as Caitlin Clark's debut. Can you share some of the experience there?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So I think for me, just like as a woman who played basketball, like just seeing the amount of attention that women's basketball is getting right now is really cool, just across the board. And some of it's like a little bit toxic, a lot of like the conversations not about basketball, but just like pitting people against each other. But in general, I think it's all good. It's a good thing that this is happening. And so, yeah, it just so happens to be that Caitlin Clark's debut was at the Connecticut Sun's home arena, and I was covering that game because it was their home opener. And there was 1 million people there, and there was a ton of reporters, and she had a pretty tough game. And the thing that stood out to me is that I cover a lot of basketball, and I never stand next to someone and feel like we're the same body type or anything. Like normally it's like a 7-foot tall guy, or even if we're talking about the WNBA, like if the way that some of the women are built, like it's just, they're so strong and tall, and just like, I don't relate at all. But she walked past me and I was actually like, she's just kind of a normal person. Like she was pretty small, and like, especially like standing next to the players, I was like, she's going to get killed. That was pregame. And then she did. And so I think it'll be a little bit of an adjustment for her just to get stronger and get comfortable with the physicality of playing professional basketball against like 30-year-old women. But she's already playing better, and I think she's already easing into it. But it was cool to see just like how much excitement there was around one player and around women's basketball in general. And certainly I saw moments of like, the crowd was a home crowd for Connecticut, but when she made a 3, people were really happy. Like they wanted the Connecticut Sun to win, but they were also wanted to see her make a couple deep threes, and she did. So I think everybody got what they wanted from that game.
Yeah, that's her calling card as well. The Celtics, as you probably remember, searched for a coach 3 years ago, and there was a billboard calling them to take Becky Hammond or Kara Lawson. Now, you're seeing this generation of players who are much more aware of diversity, and some of them even were being coached by women in their childhood. Do you think that the NBA is finally ready for a female head coach?
Yeah, I think the NBA is ready. I think the question is like, why are there like 2 assistants in the whole league that are women? Like it's one thing to have
10 already. Yeah.
What was that?
There were 10 like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so there's not, I don't know the exact number right now, but there's not many. And so I think that would be a good starting point, because ultimately like the pipeline to becoming a head coach is being an assistant coach first. And so I look at coaching staffs, it's very unusual to see a woman. Actually, the Pacers had one, and I don't know if you saw the game at the end of game 2, there was that crazy play that got Aaron Nesmith an open 3 that he missed. But that play was designed by the Pacers female assistant coach. And
really?
And it was something that she had come up with playing flag football with Sue Bird, and it was a WNBA concept. And nice. Rick Carlisle actually made it a point before game 3 to say, I incorrectly said that play came from my male assistant coach. It was actually her play. I didn't realize, but he really wanted to shine a light on that. So I thought, to me, like, that's good progress to start having women like in coaching staffs and making decisions. Like there's no women on the Celtics staff. There's no women on most. And then I think you can start talking about head coaches, because right now there's just not a pipeline. Like, you know, Becky Hammond was an unusual case. She actually was an assistant coach under Greg Popovich, and she's now probably the best head coach in women's basketball. And I don't know that she would want to leave her position. Like she's coaching the 2-time defending champs in the WNBA, and I think she has a pretty good gig. But in general, you need to have more women like her in that pipeline, because eventually one of them will land and will be the right fit, but not if you don't have a pool to draw from, even, which right now, like, there's not really a pipeline for it.
All right. And also, where can our listeners follow you? Listeners and watchers?
Yeah, I would say X or Twitter, Noah Dalzell NBA is my best spot. And then I also have like a weekly newsletter that includes like all my writing and all my video hits as well. So that's all on my Twitter.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us at Osim NBA. And next time you're in Israel, feel free to come. We'll host you on our studio, and maybe we'll have some championship gear from this year as well.
Yeah, I would love to. Maybe I can bring my dad. I know he would love to. He would love to see any of this.
Yeah, double in the podcast. Thank you very much, Noah. Have a great day and a great final series.
Thank you. Have a good one.
רבע שלישי.
Now we are joined by Yossi Gozlan, the founder of capsheets.com, also a YouTube channel bearing the same name. Yossi worked in USA Today and Hoops Hype, covering mainly issues related to the salary cap and transfer rules, which became a super crucial element for every NBA team today. How are you, Yossi?
I'm doing well, Ivan. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining us to Osim NBA. First of all, you're a capologist. How does a man become a capologist?
I just learned it by myself. I always thought in my head I'm like a fantasy GM, and what are the things I would do. And then about 5-6 years ago, I just decided I should really learn the rules, especially because I wanted to eventually be in a spot where I am talking about this stuff. But this is the stuff I care about the most, and I just studied the CBA. I studied a lot of the simplified versions of it. I learned from a lot of the guys that already know about it and see what they do. So I just learned it all by myself, just something I was very passionate about.
That's great. So there are capologists all over the place. How important is their role right now in NBA franchise front office?
I would think that it's more important now, because especially with the new rules getting harder and harder each new CBA to manage a team and to keep a team for a long time. So more planning is needed. You need a lot more strategy. Nowadays I don't think you could just get away with, doing whatever. You need to really, know the rules. You need to have a plan. So, I think some teams would do better than others. Some teams, I wonder if they even have like cap plans at all. But I think it's very important, especially on the team side of things.
We've seen the rules change in the latest CBA, making it even harder for teams to go over the salary cap. What led to the hardening of the cap, in your opinion? Was it the last straw, the Golden State Warriors title in 2022, the subsequent Joe Lacob comments and about the unfairness of the CBA?
I think maybe the Clippers, which is funny because they haven't even won at the highest level, but they're the team that have the unlimited budget, so to speak. They've been spending as much money as they want, and it seems like it's no issue. And I think they want to prevent teams like them, I guess to some degree the Warriors and Nets also were big spenders, from just being able to spend whatever they want. So they made the penalties stronger. They added these other penalties, like this future draft pick thing. In the future, you can have your draft pick frozen, so you can't trade it. So now they're adding penalties that's beyond financial, that can really affect your team building in the future. You're not allowed to have any mid-level exception if you're over the second apron. You can only re-sign your own guys. They made it like that. And if you do want to re-sign your own guys, it might get really expensive. So they're trying to make somewhat of an even playing field, but I think mostly in the end, all you're really doing is you're closing the windows of these teams for their championship windows just like a little bit more. But overall, I still think that the best planned organizations are still going to succeed in the end.
People would ask, why would some of the richest people in the United States, such as Steve Ballmer, Matt Ishbia, Joe Lacob, Miriam Edelson, even care about the luxury test if it hampers the championship's aspirations?
That's what I always wonder too. Why do they care? I don't know, I guess people do care. The only thing is, now I think the new rules actually I actually have a theory that they might care less, because by adding the second apron, I think now you're telling you're kind of putting in teams head, you know what, like, fine, whatever, pay some luxury tax. But the second apron one, that's even more severe, I think. And two, if you're below it, you'll still be in the tax a little bit, but it's not that much. Like, if you're over the second apron, then you're really deep in the tax. So I think now, if it's possible that teams might be even more willing to pay tax now. They even changed it where if you're in the tax a little bit, it's not as expensive as it was in the last CBA. So why do they care? I think just some owners are just in it to make money, it seems. But now I do wonder if they're making it a little less. I think there's going to be teams more willing to get into it a little bit. Hopefully, the new CBA actually accomplishes that.
You talked about shortening the championship windows. Do you think that the new CBA spell the end of dynasties, and is that a byproduct of the new agreement, or maybe it is its main purpose?
I mean, there hasn't really been a dynasty in a while, and the most recent one, the Warriors, they just got very lucky. Like them getting Kevin Durant while also having selected 3 Hall of Famers in a row. It's unprecedented. Like, maybe the Thunder could have kind of accomplished that. They've got 3 All-Stars now, and now they have cap space this year. If they don't use it this year, they can use it next year. But that's just from really it's all from selecting their own guys, so they're making very little. So the Warriors had this lucky the cap price went up so much they were able to just take in Kevin Durant. So I think now, yeah, you kind of do shorten the windows a little bit. Like, let's look at, I don't know, just the Nuggets, for example. They're not a dynasty, but this team, it would probably be, you would think they should be together for like over 5 years, but now it's a little unclear, because now Pope needs to get paid. What if a team like the Sixers offers him something ridiculous? And then Aaron Gordon needs to get a new deal. Jamal Murray's about to make a max extension. It's possible maybe instead of so this team has kind of been together for 3 years. Maybe what if they only have like 2 years left now because of all this stuff? Maybe even less than that. It's possible the team just gets way too expensive and the penalty just gets too much for this Nuggets team to overcome. So we'll see. We'll see how much this really affects it. One of the higher end contenders so far.
Yeah, you mentioned the Nuggets, and they just lost Bruce Brown, who could get the bag from Indiana, and eventually the same bag in Toronto, and they couldn't offer him anything near it. So they just lost him, and we saw that their bench underperformed badly in the playoffs, and they got hosted.
Yeah, they couldn't give him anything. Even if they wanted to give him more, they weren't allowed. That's what they couldn't give him anything close.
Like when we grew up, we had the dynasty of the Bulls, and even before the Lakers and the Celtics, and then the Kobe Shaq Lakers and the Spurs and the Warriors, of course. Do you think that the NBA is going too far right now to create parity?
In some ways, I do feel that way. Mainly because I think the NBA is probably better right now. Like, if you compare what was going on when the Warriors and Cavs were making the finals every year, or the Heat were making the finals every year with LeBron, like a lot of teams are just like, hey, you know what? Let's not even try. Let's just rebuild. Let's just wait until those teams are done, and maybe by then we'll have drafted good players. Maybe we have a good team ready. But so in that sense, I think the NBA is much better. That now instead of half the league and maybe not trying as much, you've really only got like 6 to 8 teams just from the beginning. Like, okay, we're not good this year. And even then, they're not. It's not like they're completely not trying in the beginning. They're trying in the beginning. I do wonder though if I feel like now, too many teams that probably shouldn't be trying at all, should be trying to focus on their future, are trying right now. You got teams like the Nets and Bulls, just as examples. Like, where are you guys going right now? I understand it's a business and you want to bring fans to the arena, and in some degree, you want to be proud. And now the play-in tournament is giving a lot of teams hope that, the Suns can, this whole system changed. Like the Lakers and Heat went to the Lakers went to Western Conference Finals last year. He went to the finals. Like there's a lot more things giving teams hope that. And then the Suns 3 years ago, they just weren't, they were out of the playoffs and just went to the finals. Like now there's a lot more hope that, that can happen to anyone. So I think that, that might be, I don't know if it's bad for the league, but in the long run, I think it would be better if some of these teams just pull the plug and just focus on their future.
Okay, now let's talk about the stars. We've talked about the teams, but let's take a look from the stars' point of view. We actually asked it about the LeBron James in our previous Cossim NBA episode. Why, in your opinion, don't we see stars take less money, like it was like in the Spurs dynasty days, to improve the team's chances of building a better supporting crew around the stars?
So I think part of it might be now there's a little more understanding about how the salary cap works, and I think teams and players are kind of, I'm sure they're working more together on meeting each other's goals. But like, for example, in the once the salary cap spike started around 2016-17, remember LeBron took somewhat of a pay cut to be with the Heat, took a little less in the max, and then once he went back to the Cavaliers, he was only taking top dollar. But the Cavs were still fine. One, because they just did a good job building the team before he came, but two, the salary cap just kept going up and up and up. So when that happens, then if you sign a longer deal, then you're actually even though you took top dollar, it's actually considered cheap now with the cap continuing to rise. Now, right now, the new TV deal just happened. And for years, like the past 2 years, there's speculation, wow, the cap's going to double or triple. But that's not going to happen anymore, because in the new CBA, they agreed to a maximum 10% rises over, just that's the maximum rise. So now that's what's going to happen. The cap's going to go up only a little bit this upcoming season, but now it's expected to go up 10% maximum, like the next, I don't know, for a while, because of this new TV deal. So if you sign like top dollar now, let me put it this way. If you sign for less than your max, when you're able to be a max player, that deal is probably going to look pretty bad for you pretty quickly, because of how quickly the cap's expected to rise. Now, at the same time, let's say you're like Jalen Brunson, for example. He can sign an extension this year that would pay him $40 million a year. It sounds amazing, especially if you hear that statement 4 or 5 years ago. But he can also be making like $55 million a year if he just waits till next year and becomes a free agent. So if you're Jalen Brunson, it sounds crazy. Why would you pass up, $15 million a year? If the Knicks are going to give it to you, but $40 million a year is also so much money. Like if taking $40 million a year is a pay cut, then the NBA system has something good going on.
Yeah, but doesn't a championship league look better than on their fingers than another 20 million
Yeah.
on their bank account? It's like it's not that they're going to be bankrupt or be beggars on the street. It's like the difference between $250 million and $280 million. It's a shitload of money anyway.
That's why I'm saying now it's actually like taking a pay cut. You're actually what it is now. It's still a lot of money. Like Drew Holiday, now he just extended with the Celtics. He was supposed to make like 40 million next year. Now he's gonna make 30 million next year. And like it's still amazing that's like you still make that much money and help your team a lot. Like that helps the Celtics so much next year. It's like taking that much less. So no, I do think though, because how the cap's rising and how much money you can still make, without making max money, maybe we will start to see more guys like what Drew Holiday just did. Maybe Jalen Brunson, he actually does it maybe as well. Maybe he does take that smaller extension because that would help the Knicks so much. It would help them like immensely if he was making 40 million a year instead of 55.
Yeah, so that's a small money for them. Yeah, obviously big money for the rest of the world. So we're not going to see like another San Antonio Spurs where the players were taking just substantially less money than what they could just to get others. Is it is think of an ego? Your opinion, like who's going to get the bag? Who's going to get the biggest contract?
I'm sure it is to some degree. Like I just released a video on the Lakers last night, and I talk about how they could get Trae Young or Donovan Mitchell. I don't think they're going to get either player, but I just talk about how they could actually make it happen with the trade, what it's possible, and how the rest of the roster would look, because then you have three very expensive players. And then I bring up the possibility, what if, what would help a lot in that scenario is if LeBron James took less money for this upcoming season, because then they're able to replace. They have to give up so many players just to make the money work that it would help if you can then have some room to bring in replace one of those guys you traded. So, if you're a guy like LeBron who already has, I think he has like 400 million in career earnings, and you only need to take a temporary pay cut to help your team this year, and then you can get back to the max next year. I think it's a sacrifice definitely worth considering, but I mean, I guess so in a way, like LeBron is like he's expected to take the max. I guess in a way, like if he does when there is an opportunity to if there is an opportunity to get a legitimate star, but he does it anyway, he just takes the max anyway. You could kind of say, yeah, he's LeBron. He wants to be perceived as the highest paid guy. He wants to be making top dollar as he deserves. But I do think though, for some of these older veterans that they get late into their career and you already made a lot of money, why not? Why not pay substantially less? Really help your teams if you want to maximize your window.
I'm 100% with you. How do you see the new CBA rules impacting the upcoming free agency and draft?
So I mean, it's different because this year the salary cap's going up very small. So that in combination with some of the new changes might hurt some players. You might be surprised to see some guys that are worth, certain amount of money, maybe they get squeezed for the minimum. That happened a lot last year. Guys like Dennis Smith, Lonnie Walker, like, whoa, how did these guys?
Derek Jones Jr. Derek Jones Jr. from Dallas is playing on the minimum.
Yeah. And so a lot of these guys just got they got, and I think part of that might be that some of these top spenders that they would have at least somewhat a little mid-level exception. Now they have no mid-level exception. They can't pay these guys fairly. So I wonder if there's going to be in the negative. I suppose maybe there's still more of those guys once getting squeezed. But other than that, I don't know if it's still hard to tell how it's going to impact free agency. far as the draft, I'm not a draft expert. I'm not sure. But I do think, though, because it's so much harder to build a team once you have such an expensive roster, that make draft picks more valuable. You're going to want more draft picks because there's no limit on how many players you can draft and sign. So, like the Nuggets last year, they made a trade where they got like 3 draft picks in last year's draft because that's when they could bring. And, strategy didn't quite work as well as they hoped, but it is kind of the right idea of once you're that expensive and you can't really bring in other good players, just try to get some young players that can help now they cost very little. And if it works, then you have a more sustainable bench during this run.
As somebody who really knows the CBA from the in and out, are there still some loopholes that the Sam Prestis and the Daryl Morris of the world are going to exploit, and all these genius capologists that we don't should keep an eye on?
Maybe the only thing I could think of off the top of my head is maybe there's some ways you can sign a player to a little less than the max, but then be put in the position where you can just give them the same max next year. I don't know. It's complicated, but I'm not really. I guess we'll just know once we see them. I haven't really thought about it myself.
But we can also remember that the last time a player took less than the max to accommodate other players, with James Harden in Philly, it ended up as a league investigation that took them a draft pick. So, maybe
I don't think players are going. You got to be careful with these planned contracts nowadays. I doubt anyone's going to do that with the Sixers this year.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, Yossi Gozlan, where can we follow your work nowadays?
All right, so you can find me on Twitter at Yossi Gozlan. You can find me on YouTube at Yossi Gozlan NBA. So I just started that channel. I'm just talking about the CBA and teams and what they can do. I'm very encouraged by the start so far. And so if you ever read my work on Hoopsite, this is more like video form. And then I have my website, capsheets.com, where I have the cap sheets. You can see them. They're updated in real time. Very simple. They're like, you can only see this season and the future season, and it's to the point. It tells you what you need to know about how, their payroll, the tax, apron levels, what do they have to spend. Very simplified. I think it's pretty easy to understand.
Yeah, we all play the trade machines in these days more than ever. And everybody wants to be a general manager, so we can have our takes and our fake trades and stuff. Yossi Gozlan from Los Angeles, thank you very much for joining עושים NBA. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
ועד כאן, פרק 182 של עושים NBA. בשבוע הבא כבר נחזור לאולפן כדי לנתח את סדרת הגמר ואת הקיץ של אלה שנפלו רגע לפני המעמד הגדול. בכל מה שקרה בימים האחרונים, ומה שעוד יקרה ואנחנו עוד לא יודעים. אני סורוקה, להתראות בפרק 183.